Welcome back, everybody, to Full Press Coverage Radio. This is the Full Press Coverage Steelers podcast. This is your host, Parker Hurley, as always. And as always, I'm bringing in my co-host, Brian Harker, who's over at SteelersWire.com. So let's bring in Brian. Let's see how he's doing today. How are you, Brian?
I'm doing good. I'm wore out. Yesterday and the day before, we spent most of our days sealing a driveway, so that was 15 5-gallon buckets worth of hard work. It's done, it looks good, and I'm ready to roll.
Yeah, and I know, you're out in, the Midwest, but if it's as hot out there as it is in Pittsburgh, that was one hot day that you just had out there. It's been pumping out, 90-plus degree weather. We're in the midst of, the dead of the summer, the dead time between the NFL OTAs and training camp, but we're getting very, very close to cool weather, fall weather, football. Put the fire on, watch the game. It's coming, guys. It's less than a month away. We're within 3 weeks. I think it's 10 days the Steelers report to training camp. So we're previewing training camp all offseason. We have been. Follow every episode we have at the podcast center. We've been breaking down the Steelers position by position heading into training camp. We hit the entire offense already. We've been breaking down the defense so far in the past few weeks. We hit the defensive line. I talked about how that's arguably one of the best positions on the team, top to bottom. We talked about the edge rushers and how there's almost a question mark at every single position. And now on the defense, we're going to head into inside linebackers. And, you want to talk about a position with a lot of question marks. This is a team that, at this point last year, Ryan Shazier was, the past, the present, and the future at the position. He was almost everything that this team had invested in the position. And, you get to the Bengals game, almost a little over midway through the season. And, not only is Ryan Shazier's 2017 season over, his 2018 season is over, and we're really not even concerned about his 2019 season right now. All the reports we're looking for are just that he's walking. That's everything that I would say is just, I know I'm a, Steelers guy as much as everybody else. We all want to talk about, when can Ryan Shazier get back on the field? What can we do? Let's just worry about his health first. Let's not even, the way that I'm approaching the Ryan Shazier situation is that if he never plays football again, that's completely fine with me. As long as he's healthy, obviously, that's what I would be rooting for. But I'm not expecting him to play football anymore. If he does, that's amazing. That is just such a, ice cream, everything on top. It's just, it would be the best. And it would put the Steelers maybe in a tough situation because they need to replace Ryan Shazier, and they cannot, leave the door open for him. They need to replace him hard, fast, steady, over the long term. And like I said, if he does come back and you have 3 inside linebackers, that's great. But at this point, you're wondering how many the Steelers even have. And that will bring us into the depth chart with Vince Williams, who will be the first guy we talk about because he started last season. Started 16 games all last season. I believe he started 17 in his first 3 seasons. So he got a big boost up in his role. It was supposed to be right next to Ryan Shazier, and him and Ryan Shazier, there was a great article on Bleacher Report how the two are just really good friends with each other, kind of just grew up together. Vince Williams was a 6th-round pick, and then after his rookie season, Shazier was a 1st-round pick. Just the contrast of, 1st-round, high athlete, motor, leader type of person, whereas Vince was the 6th-rounder, a special teams player, a grinder, everything like that. They meshed really well together last season. When Shazier left for the season, he was leading the team in interceptions. Vince Williams was leading the team in sacks. And that was actually something that Shazier told Vince Williams that they were going to do. It was his, shake and bake mentality, fire and ice. I'm running around chasing tight ends. You're running around chasing running backs and the quarterback, Vince. So that's who Vince Williams is. So when you talk about replacing Ryan Shazier, that's not who he is. Like I said, he's the exact opposite. He's the complement to Ryan Shazier. So the question that I have to you is, without Ryan Shazier, is there even a bigger role for Vince Williams? Or are we kind of just saying Vince Williams is who he is? He's a complement to Ryan Shazier. Now we have to replace Ryan Shazier. So where do you stand on what exactly Vince Williams is as a player right now?
Vince Williams, like you said, is Robin. And Vince Williams' role should be Robin. He did a tremendous job sliding over and taking Shazier's spot, but that's not who he is. The Steelers would be much better off if they could find that guy to step in because, let's face it, you're never going to replace Ryan Shazier. Athletically, it's just not going to happen. But if you can keep Vince Williams in the role where he's meant to be and find somebody to complement or that he can complement in place of Shazier's position, That's the best ideal situation I think the Steelers could have this year.
Yeah, you hit it exactly that. And I'm going to say it throughout this episode because we have to, that no one is going to replace Ryan Shazier. I'm going to say the words, he has to replace Ryan Shazier. He needs to step in for Ryan Shazier. Nobody's going to step in and it's like, oh, Ryan Shazier, who? We're not going to just forget about him. Nobody on this roster can compare to Ryan Shazier. But that doesn't mean that the Steelers can just leave a hole open and, not put anybody there and just deal without it. They have to put somebody there. They have to deal with it. That's what we're looking for. But like you said, it's really not Vince Williams. Vince Williams has to pretty much stay in his role. He doesn't have the range. You talked about it. In the Jaguars game, the playoff loss, it showed completely how him and Sean Spence were the two starting linebackers. Neither of those two had any idea how to communicate the defense to each other. They would look at what the Jaguars are running. Neither of them would know really what to do or say about, what they see in front of them. And then the play would happen and they would kind of run into each other. There are actually plays of Spence and Shazier. Spence is shifting left, Vince Williams is shifting right, and they run into each other. Like, that's the communication issues that the Steelers had in the linebacker position when Vince Williams was running the show. So it's really tough to say that Vince Williams can run the show. He is what he is. He's the sidekick, like you said. He's the second man. He's a blitzer. He's a downhill run stuffer. That you love. So one last question before we wrap up on Vince Williams is he's going to enter training camp. This is a contract season for Vince Williams. The Steelers typically like to sign guys, the year before their contract season. So there's a chance that this offseason, the Steelers are going to head into the negotiating tables with Vince Williams. Just knowing, that he is a good backup and he is good in his specific role. Are you fine extending Vince Williams this offseason, or do you kind of want to go into this season and then say, this offseason will fully reevaluate the entire linebacker position because, maybe we need a complement to someone else that we're going to talk about later, or maybe we need an upgrade over Vince Williams because we can't replace Ryan Shazier in the way that we want to. So where do you stand on his contract status?
I wouldn't have a problem if they signed him to an extension because ultimately I think what he did last year and the role he got thrust into is going to make him better at the role he does. I think that Vince Williams has earned his spot on the roster, for lack of a better term. It's only going to make him better. So yeah, if they want to sign him to an extension, I'd have no problem with it.
Yeah, I don't either, and I think that the big thing that you get when you have Vince Williams, and, if you run down his Twitter account, I feel like you can understand what type of person he is. But like I said, 6th-round pick, no maintenance, worked his way to the top, special teams player. He seems like a player who, I don't know that he owes the Steelers, but he seems like he really respects how the Steelers run as an organization. And if you were to ever to say, in a few weeks we're saying, oh, they got him on a team-friendly deal, for the next 3 years, it would be a guy like Vince Williams. And that's where I have no qualms re-signing him to, like I said, a team-friendly deal, probably for even his skill set. It's going to be pretty cheap. So I don't have any issue with that. Onto the depth and onto who could play beside Vince Williams, who can replace Ryan Shazier, because we feel firm in the idea that Vince Williams is not replacing Ryan Shazier. The first name is going to surprise some people. It's Tyler Matakevich. According to Jeremy Fowler and a few other guys, he's going to be the starter on the very first day of training camp. He's going to be the one that is standing beside Vince Williams that you need to knock off of the mountain. He's the guy right now. And it came from a really strong OTA performance where a lot of the coaches said that mentally he really gets it. Like we talked about with Vince Williams, that's exactly where he doesn't get it. But Matakevich is able to see things, he's able to pick things up, and he's able to make changes off of them. So that's a huge boost for this kid, who is a 7th-round pick from Temple, really undersized linebacker. I believe he was the Buckus Award winner at college. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he was one of the best linebackers in college when he was drafted. Slipped all the way down to the combine. Slipped all the way down the draft because he had a terrible combine. Showed up undersized. Showed up completely unathletic. I want to say he ran something like a 4.6. He ran a 4.81 in the 40. I mean, this guy, he doesn't have it athletically, but he does understand what he's doing. And in a similar mold to Vince Williams, is a guy that first 2 seasons played special teams. It was the 4th season where Vince Williams was thrust into a starting role. It could be the 3rd for Tyler Matakevich where he's thrust into a starting role. The interesting thing that I have with him, and I've already talked about his size and lack of athleticism. Last year, he was a star special teamer for the entirety of the season. But when Ryan Shazier got hurt, Matakevich was the first man up, the first player off of the bench, and then he got hurt. He hurt his shoulder, and the team did not go back to him at linebacker. He continued to dress, he continued to play special teams, but he was not playing linebacker anymore. Mike Tomlin talked about that. He said that Matakevich suffered a shoulder injury early into the season on special teams. Matakevich knew that he could deal with the shoulder injury with his special team snaps, but when he was thrown into the fire of actual physical defensive snaps, his shoulder just couldn't hold up at all. I guess, a question that I have from that situation is, if his shoulder's not holding up, from a season of special teams, maybe 40, 50 snaps on defense, is he a player who can hold up for the long term? Is he a player, between Vince Williams and Matakevich, you have two slow linebackers and two players who are not very athletic. Two players who are, Vince Williams relies on strength, Matakevich relies on, being shifty and smart. That lacks a lot of athleticism. Nobody's covering tight ends and running backs between the two. So there is a lack of upside. I do have questions about his size and his injury concerns. But the Steelers love this kid. The Steelers are very high on Tyler Matakevich to throw him into the starting role. So where do you stand on the 7th round undersized kid from Temple?
I'm curious as to how his shoulder is going to hold up. I mean, I guess he had surgery late in the season or early off season. Am I correct in that?
I think so, yeah. I honestly think he had it during the season and then, like I said, played some special team snaps post-surgery. If I'm getting that right, I believe that's what happened.
Well, either way, I could see where the Steelers would just they got to have somebody at number one, and he makes the most sense because of his experience within the defense. And from there, you're going to have to, he's going to have to prove himself worthy of that spot. If the shoulder's holding up, I don't know, you remember Zach Thomas from the Miami Dolphins? They're
right. Similar
in a lot of ways. He wasn't athletic, he wasn't fast, but his anticipation allowed him to get to the ball to make the play. And Matakevich is a lot similar to him in that regard. I'm kind of curious with the whole change in defensive philosophy, what it really means to have a number one and a number two, and you wonder how many rotations, what kind of a rotation they're going to have at inside linebacker. But I can't argue with Matakevich being listed as the starter heading into camp because that's what it's all about. The best person's going to win that job.
Right, yeah, it's just what you said. Just like Zach Thomas, you might be like, I have concerns. I have serious concerns about his size and athleticism. I'm unsure how he's going to hold up against bigger, stronger competition. But at the same time, like you said, if he can understand and if he can hit that spot so much faster because he's anticipating that it's really not as big of a deal, and he is a strong tackler, and he has proven that he has that reckless abandon to really stick his head in there. That's, if you're making a name on special teams, that's exactly why. So there is at least that to go with on Tyler Matakevich. I just stand in the class of skeptical about it. But like I said, I understand that the Steelers do really like this kid. They do really want to see what they have in him. But of the group, I'm really putting my chips in this third player that we're about to talk about. And it's the player that the Steelers signed this offseason. And that's kind of why I'm thinking that, this is probably the guy that's eventually going to take this job, and that's Jon Bostic, who has been around the NFL a little bit. I believe this is his 4th or 5th season. He's 26 years old. Spent the first couple years with the Chicago Bears, spent some time with the Patriots and the Colts as well. He has some injury issues, but when he's healthy, he has been a really good player. He's been a play caller of a defense. He's been a hard hitter. He's been a run stuffer. And, you kind of look at him and Matakevich. Their biggest strength is probably the same exact thing. And it's like you said, the anticipation and the communication and the ability to get everybody in line. And like I said, that's the perfect compliment to Vince Williams. So that makes it understandable as to why the Steelers would try and sign Jon Bostic, given the Ryan Shazier situation. Like I said, they can't just be saying, this is 1 year and we'll hope Shazier will be back. They're saying, we need to throw resources, whether it is the 7th round pick in Matakevich, whether it's this free agent in Jon Bostic, whether we have to, scrap the board after neither of those two hit. You talked about how it might be a rotation next year. I could see it to where, Bostic and Matakevich are splitting series at some point, or, I don't know exactly how it's going to go. I personally think that Matakevich is ahead of Bostic because, like you said, he has the experience. I don't think you hand a 26-year-old, like I said, who, really only has one great year of starting, who has injury experience, this is his fourth team in 5 seasons. You don't hand that guy a starting job on the first day of training camp and say, you're our future for Ryan Shazier, everything relies on you. You make him say, hey, this 7th round pick in his 3rd season is ahead of you, show us that you can communicate, show us that you can get everybody in line, show us that you're reading and defending the run well, and then you'll earn that job, by the 3rd preseason game, is likely how I would see the timetable going. So where do you stand on Bostic? Do you think that he could beat, I guess not only Matakevich, I personally think he's coming for Matakevich, but what if Matakevich shows up well? I think Bostic is versatile enough to where, does he compete with Vince Williams? Is that a competition if Matakevich is really showing well? So where do you stand on Bostic, not only for this year, but is there a future? Is there, is he cutting into some of the Ryan Shazier issues, not only this year, but down the line?
Yeah, Shazier's one in a generation type of athletic. Shazier made mistakes, but he had the speed and athleticism to make up for them. And then as he learned, he became much better. He was just really beginning to scratch into his abilities when he was injured. I think with Bostic, people say, and there's rightfully so to be concerned about his injuries in the past. The one positive about it, it's never really been the same type of injury or soft tissue injury. It's always just been, somebody rolled up on his leg or whatever, something of that nature. So I think if he's past that, I really believe that, once again, he's going to fill a position, and he's going to do a good job filling that position. His ability to communicate and his quickness. If you recall in the Colts game last year, he ended up sniffing out was it a sweep or I believe it was a sweep where he tackled Bryant for a loss of 8 yards.
Yep.
So his anticipation and his intelligence play well into what Pittsburgh wants to do on defense. So I think I like the addition of him. It's not flashy, but it's a typical Pittsburgh signing, kind of like James Ferrier was the decade before. This guy just does everything well, and he has a high football IQ and the ability to communicate, which is really what hurt the defense most last year.
Yeah, you hit it. I think it was a reverse to Martavis Bryant, and he just caught him from behind pretty much. That was a really impressive play by Bostic. And like I said, I think he does have a strong combination of not only understanding, but quicks and power. We're not out here saying, Jon Bostic is this elite starter in the NFL, but we are saying that Jon Bostic is a starter in the NFL, whereas I don't think anyone's sure about that with Tyler Matakevich. So that's where I stand. I'm Team Bostic heading into camp. We'll definitely see where it goes. Like you said, when the Steelers sign a free agent, they're typically not just looking for a one-year fix. Bostic is 26. Bostic does have second-round pedigree. He's had teams take chances on him, and he excelled last season in his role. Started 14 games, missed the last 2 due to an injury, but he said that the injury was, he just didn't want to re-hurt it in Week 15 of a meaningless season during his contract year, and that's completely fair. So there's upside to Bostic. There is potential down the road, for the next 4 seasons that he's a starter. It is on him to earn it, and he does have to beat out a guy like Tyler Matakevich in the next few weeks. I personally don't see that as a huge issue, though. So we'll move on from Bostic from there and get into LJ Fort, who's probably going to be the 4th linebacker. He's a guy that, last year, me and Brian were saying, hey, watch out for LJ Fort. Keep an eye on him. You never know. He's going to make the team because of his special teams prowess. He made the team due to his special teams prowess, but we thought that if there was ever going to be an opportunity, that LJ Fort would probably get a chance at some point. When Ryan Shazier went down, like I said, they went to Matakevich. That wasn't a huge surprise. But when Matakevich went down, they signed Sean Spence off of the street, and early into this situation, Spence was kind of rotating in with a guy like LJ Fort, and they were kind of just figuring it out drive by drive, situation by situation. I believe I wrote something along the lines of, when they're anticipating heavy run sets, Sean Spence was out there. When they're anticipating heavy pass sets, LJ Fort was out there. But by the time of the playoffs against the Jacksonville Jaguars, it was almost solely Sean Spence. So really, Sean Spence, who was unsigned all season, who's currently unsigned right now, he's currently a free agent, This dude, off of the street, 3 weeks of practice, was just able to, beat and shine over LJ Fort. That gives me just a very sour taste in my mouth for LJ Fort. Like I said, I was high on him. I was hoping for a little more from him. I was hoping for him to get a chance last season. But I think that the fact that Sean Spence was getting a real chance over him just shows to the fact that the Steelers have absolutely no confidence in him. So to me, I'm wondering what his status is not only this year but moving forward, because he's the fourth inside linebacker that we've named. So, if something happens to Vince Williams, what are they going to do? Are they going to sign another guy off of the street to start over LJ Fort, or is LJ Fort actually going to get a shot? Where do you stand on Fort after last year? Because it must have been something that happened in practice. It wasn't really something that showed on game tape that they didn't really give him a chance. But where do you stand on him?
Yeah, I'm kind of along the lines of my concern level is a little up. If he can't beat a guy that hasn't played football in a year or two, what's he really doing on the roster?
Right.
He showed flashes of athletic ability, and he's played well in the preseason and even in some spots during games. But if you don't have the confidence to go to Fort, when Matakevich goes down and you're taking a guy that hasn't been in your system, in 2 years?
Right.
That should raise some flags. And I'll tell you what, they signed Matthew Thomas out of Florida State as an undrafted agent. That could be the end of LJ Fort on a Steeler roster. So I wouldn't look for much out of Fort going into training camp, seeing as how things played out last year with him.
Yep, you hit it on the head, and that's going to just bring us right into the fifth guy that I wanted to talk about, and it is Matthew Thomas. And it's because all offseason, from the injury to Ryan Shazier, even after they signed Jon Bostic, the idea was that early into this offseason, or early into the NFL draft, the Steelers were going to be drafting a middle linebacker and would be trying to, transition him into a starting role, whether it be to replace Vince Williams, Jon Bostic, Matakevich, whoever. They were probably going to need a young linebacker. They went all 7 rounds. They didn't draft one. And then they signed Matthew Thomas from Florida State. And, you start to say, geez, oh, man, what are you doing? Why are you waiting? And then you start to read about Matthew Thomas, and you start to say, well, maybe there's something here. I think he was the number 6 player across the country, he was number 6 at his position, number 8 overall, if I'm getting it right, coming out of high school on the national recruiting scale. So huge prospect. His first season, I believe he was it was either the year after Telvin Smith or he was replacing Telvin Smith, had a strong freshman season. Then some family issues started to come around. I don't want to get into all of them. You can Google search them for the most part if you wanted to. But the thing that I would say is that this isn't a guy getting arrested. This isn't a guy with drug and alcohol issues. He had one issue where he broke a team rule where the team didn't really report on what it was. But if you start to read into his family situation, you could probably understand where him breaking the team rule came from. Then he tore his shoulder, and then he was academically ineligible. That, in my opinion, goes right back to his family issues that you can look into some of that as well. So he had a lot going on personally. Between the ages of 19 and 21, that can affect literally every single person in the world. So it makes a complete sense that it affected Matthew Thomas. He hasn't really been able to progress since he was 18 years old and was that high upside linebacker. But he went to the NFL Combine, and he was a very high upside linebacker. He's a very talented player. You start to look at some of his numbers. They're not too far off of Ryan Shazier. He's 6'2", 232, ran a 4.58, broad jump 131, vertical 41.5 inches, 20-yard shuttle 4.28, 3-cone 6.25 or 6.85. Anytime you're under a 7 in the 3-cone, it's really impressive. So the guy's fast, he's big, he's strong, he can change directions. Everything you want from a linebacker is in Matthew Thomas. The issue is he's never really been on a field, even at a college level, for an extended period of time, and he has no idea what he's doing out there. The game, even at Florida State, looks way too fast for him. That's why you're going to go undrafted. But you start to look at some of the other players, and I wanted Malik Jefferson in round 3, and if you were to describe Malik Jefferson, it's, this high upside athlete. He can defend the pass. He can fly around, change directions, but he doesn't really know what he's doing out there. So, there's a chance that the Steelers graded Matthew Thomas and graded Malik Jefferson and had Matthew Thomas as a higher graded player and said that, well, we can get the higher graded player undrafted versus taking one in the third round. There is a chance that that's actually what's going on here. I think that if that's a fact and they actually graded him similarly to Malik Jefferson, he's making the team. Like you said, he could very easily make the team as the fourth linebacker thanks to LJ Fort. The Steelers also kept 5 linebackers last year, and he's the 5th guy that I'm talking about. I just see him as a lock to make the team. I see his speed and athleticism working very well on special teams. And I think that, of these 4, Bostic's probably got the highest upside in my opinion. But really right behind him is Matthew Thomas, who I really could see at some point starting for the Steelers after maybe a year or two. I said, once the game slows down for him, once he starts to get used to being on a higher level of field of competition. So where do you stand on Matthew Thomas? Because I just laid out a case for, a UDFA in a few years to be starting. I like his upside a lot more than Tyler Matakevich, who was a former 7th-round pick. So just where do you stand on the guy?
I stand right where you do. I mean, with the personal issues he went through in college, that it's totally understandable that he reacted the way he did. Now, people react differently, but he wasn't a troublemaker. It was just an emotional time for him. And like I say, his senior year, I mean, he played some pretty good ball. And I think you're right that the Steelers said, hey, we could probably get this guy as an undrafted free agent, so why take somebody who's comparable, maybe not even as good athletically as some in the early rounds or in any round when we can get that undrafted? So I like that move, and I can totally see him once he understands the defense and he's get to a point where he can just start reacting. He's going to be a good football player. I could see him. I could see the Steelers parting ways with Ford and this guy taking the spot for sure.
Yeah, I could absolutely see it, and I could see that if so and so were to get hurt, Thomas should probably see the field over Fort, even as an undrafted rookie. It's just let's throw the guy out there and see what we have in him at least. He's the guy to watch though, throughout preseason, throughout training camp, throughout everything, because they know they have to get this guy on the field. I mean, if you look at the list of undrafted free agents, he's the prize. Like, he is the guy as the UDFA. Like I said, the more I watch him, I'm starting to, talk myself into the fact that him and Malik Jefferson are not too far off of each other. So I'm talking myself into it. I'm hoping that Matthew Thomas talks the Steelers into it this summer. But it truly is on him. He has to show that he's a more mature person and that he's grown from, personal tragedy in his life, but that he's grown from it and that he can embrace coaching, embrace a new role, embrace learning. And, it's going to be tough for him. He's going to struggle like crazy. We all remember first-round pick Artie Burns. They threw AB at him for weeks and weeks early into his career. And, they talked about how frustrating it was for Artie, but how it made him a better player. The Steelers are going to treat a UDFA way worse than they're going to treat a first-round pick. So they're going to throw him out there. Matthew Thomas is going to get very frustrated. So it's going to be on him to prove that, that doesn't hold him all the way back. So like I said, sometimes 5 guys make it. Usually 4 definitely will. Sometimes 5 will. So those are the 5. You talked about how Thomas will probably advance over Fort. There are 2 other names that we could probably talk about here, and that's really rounds up the roster. I believe both of them were on practice squad last year, and it's one of our boys, Matt Galambos, who we talked about a lot last season. And I believe, if it sounds correct, I believe that we compared him to LJ Fort and how he was going to, kind of peruse his way up the roster and, eventually be that 5th special teams linebacker. So we might just be right on with Matt Galambos, and it might just be this season where he takes that LJ Fort role if he has a strong camp. But there's Matt Galambos, and then there's Keith Kelsey as well. Galambos is from Pitt. I'm going to look up where Kelsey's from. Kelsey's from Louisville. So the 2 really, I'm pretty sure they were pretty similar in camp. They kind of competed right next to each other, started right next to each other in the preseason last year. So I don't think there's too much ebb and flow with each other. I believe me and you both lean Galambos. Do you still feel that way? Do you have any thoughts on Kelsey? Do you think one, the other, or both could compete with LJ Fort for a roster spot?
I like Galambos. I mean, Galambos, once again, all he did was make plays in the preseason last year. He was where he was supposed to be. He's a highly intelligent player, and he has some athletic ability to him. I think if it comes down to Kelsey and Galambos, I'm thinking that Jerry Osofsky, being the Pitt guy, is going to lean towards Pitt, if all things being equal.
I like Galambos too. I think it was just a couple plays on special teams last year where I really think that I really started to like him. I think there were some reports that, it is understanding with him. It is picking things up quick with him, where I think Kelsey is more of a speed athlete type of player. But I think you're on it. I think I'm on it that we would not be shocked at all if Matt Galambos beat out L.J. Fort, especially just considering where L.J. Fort was last year. It's just tough to say, as good as L.J. Fort is on special teams, if you can't start him at all at any point in the season, how much can you really use the guy? So I think, looking back on it, we stand in at least a very similar spot. Vince Williams is the buck, he's the Mac. He's the guy right next to Shazier. He's the guy holding down the run. He's the guy, pummeling in the box, blitzing. We think that it'll be Matakevich and Bostic in an open competition. Matakevich comes in with the heads up because of the experience, but we think that the talent and the understanding of Bostic will probably give him a real chance to step up as well. But the idea is that, you're replacing Ryan Shazier. You probably need both of those linebackers and then some to actually get the most out of what you're trying to get. So it doesn't really shut the door for Tyler Matakevich, even if Bostic is to prove what we think he can prove. And really, when he's healthy, he has been able to prove that. So those are really the top three. I think those three are going to see a ton of playing time, all three of them. Then you get into, like we said, Matthew Thomas. I really do think that, he's pretty much the fourth. He's the special teams practice squad, or coming up UDFA, the way that the Steelers like to build up these late round draft picks at linebacker. Matthew Thomas is right there. If things were to happen, maybe Matthew Thomas sees the field a little bit as a rookie, but then it's LJ Fort and Matthew Galambos, in my opinion, competing for the fifth spot. You could obviously throw Keith Kelsey in there. So those are the guys, that's pretty much how it's going to break down. Like I said, they're going to keep four for sure. Thomas would probably be the fourth in my opinion. But then, from the fifth guy, it should be open for debate. So there's a lot to watch for this offseason, whether it is Matakevich, Bostic, whether it is Thomas, or whether it is the depth. There's really a lot to watch for. Like I said, there's more questions in this position than a lot of the other ones. Brian, do you have anything else you want to just throw in for the entire linebacker group heading into the 2018 season?
Yeah, I think if you take it from the part where Shazier went down with an injury, with the signing of Bostic, the Steelers are better off now than where they are at that point. They're once again, you're never going to replace the athletic ability of a Ryan Shazier, but you're replacing him at the position. And I got to say, I believe they're in pretty good shape heading into training camp, unless they find another body somewhere. I think it's going to shake out that the starters are going to be Bostic and they're going to be Vince Williams. I think that Matakevich is much better as filling in for either one of them for any reason. I don't see L.J. Fort making the roster. You might want to try to sneak him on the practice squad, because if Thomas does well, you're not going to get him on the practice squad. Somebody's going to snatch him up. So that's how I see the top four as being similar to you. Maybe try to sneak Fort on the practice squad, and I'm liking the stability that they have right now. Not as good as with Shazier, but good enough.
Yeah, I agree completely. And like you said, when Shazier went hurt, the first person they went to was Matakevich. So even just to get Matakevich back is an upgrade over where the Steelers' defense was against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And then, like you said, to add in Jon Bostic as well. And then, you start to talk about, Terrell Edmonds, Morgan Burnett. They're all additions with the idea in mind that Ryan Shazier needs to be replaced in multiple areas. So you are right that the defense is better now, especially in the Ryan Shazier department, than last year. Last year they were truly a chicken with their head cut off, just running into walls. And at least now they're starting to sew it back on. So, it's not all pretty and dandy. We're not in life past Shazier yet, but we're slowly getting there, hopefully. And it could be, let's just keep an eye on Matthew Thomas. I'm just going to say it one more time. Keep an eye on Matthew Thomas this offseason. Hopefully he can be a guy. But that was Brian Harker. Check out everything he does on SteelersWire.com. He's doing some big things over there. I'm Parker Hurley, at Parker Hurley on Twitter, at FPC_Steelers. FullPressCoverage.com. Everywhere, everything you need to know about the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's a training camp article every single day now. There's been 4 up already. Check those out at FullPressCoverage.com. We'll be back. We'll probably have quarterbacks in the next couple days. Then we'll have safeties, and that'll pretty much wrap us up, and we'll be ready for training camp. So season's coming fast, guys. Let's get ready for it. And yeah, like I already said, that was Brian. I'm Parker. You guys have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.